You have now arrived at your destination.
Frank, I've wanted to do this one for a long time. I've heard so many good things from Doug at Square and Mike at Sutter Hill. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Now,
Let's have some fun.
let's have some fun indeed. But I want to start with a little bit from the book, actually. And when we normally start, we start with some context. And you said we all need to be careful which elevator we get into early in our career. What did you mean by this, Frank?
Well, some elevators go up, some go down, some don't move, and you have no control over, what that elevator is doing. And if you've joined a really good company, I mean, you're in an elevator that's going up, and if you joined a not so good company, the elevator may not be moving. And it doesn't matter, what you did or didn't do. I mean, your individual merit is irrelevant. It's sort of like being a card player. When you may be a really good card player, but if you have a bad hand of cards, the outcome is going to be, not that great. So it's you really got to choose carefully because your individual merit cannot overcome, the circumstances of your choices. And I have unfortunately lived the consequences of this little bit of wisdom over and over to the point where, okay, it's pretty important that you make wise choices and not just think, oh, I'm really good. I can will myself to, incredible outcomes. I had a chat with a CEO of a very large software company not long ago, and he said, I can't figure you out. Do you just know how to pick them, or are you a really good CEO? And I said, no, hopefully a little bit of both, because those are the things you need.
I absolutely love that. Well, speaking of picking them, tell me, in terms of a quick intro, how did you come to be CEO at Snowflake, for those that don't know?
Well, I was on the board of Pure Storage with Mike Spicer for many years, and I've known Mike before then as well because at Data Domain, which was our first company, Mike was Sutter Hill. Sutter Hill was one of our investors. So we would periodically get together after a board meeting and just talk about the state of affairs and what's up, what's down, that kind of a thing. And we always talked about Snowflake, me observing from a distance, not knowing all that much or caring because I was actually off in those days doing other stuff. But obviously Mike was very, very involved with Snowflake in those days. And, at one point he thought I should join the board, and I'm like, knock yourself out, let me know. Never heard anything. I'm not really paying attention. And then one day, it's like it was March of 2019. He's like, and by the way, I'm not working. I'm not talking to anybody. Certainly I'm not making noises about wanting to re-enter the fray. He just out of the blue said, "What would it take for you to take the helm?" I think he also likes nautical terms, at Snowflake, and I was like, "What?" so, I just was completely unprepared for that, mentally or otherwise. But I've been off for 2 years at that point, and it kind of ignited a spark, and things just sometimes just happen. It wasn't an organized thought process. It wasn't an organized process at all. I never talked to anybody else about anything. This is the only company that was a consideration. Obviously. We have no regrets. Sometimes, your impulsive moments are your best ones.
I do want to also say, mentioning that entry into the CEO role at Snowflake, this is the third rocket ship company you've been a part of, Frank. That is abnormally accurate for a hit rate. Like, no one has done that other than you. And so when I spoke to Doug Leone, he said to me, how did he do it? What enabled you to do this? Simply.
Oh, God, I don't really know. It's not something that sort of puzzles me on a daily basis. It's not a question that's on my radar. Obviously, like I just said, choosing elevators wisely is kind of a big deal. Because there's so many things that you can't change about the circumstance, right? You may be a really good operator and have all these qualities, but you really have to look hard at what you've got. I didn't always have that luxury. When I joined Data Domain, I had no idea what I was getting into. There was no revenue, there were no customers, there were 15 people. It had two good investors, which was sort of what inspired me. but everything else came after. That was sort of a leap in the dark. There were hundreds of companies back in those days. And that one, I'm actually very proud of the work we collectively did there, because it became such an outlier of a company. But, at the time, I mean, that was far from obvious or clear. You could argue Snowflake was already an outlier. When I joined, it was far easier, far more obvious to make that determination. ServiceNow was not that easy a determination either. I remember, when I knew nothing about that space, or next to nothing about that space, and I started making some inquiries, and analysts here and there, they're like, "Oh yeah, that's a sleepy business." The last battle, lots of disparaging comments, about ServiceNow. But the company had high growth, and high growth is high growth. I mean, you can say what you want, but high growth is high growth, and it means something. There's something going on, okay? So you got to get your arms around it and really figure out where's that coming from, because high growth is rare, okay? That just doesn't happen. So obviously ServiceNow was replacing legacy ticketing systems, help desk management from BMC and CA and HP and all these companies, and it was not a terribly exciting business at all. But obviously we dramatically changed how that company conceptualized itself, what it was. I mean, it became clear to me during the process of getting to know the company that this was not a help desk management tool. This was a generic workflow platform that was just aimed at an opportunity, because the founding team knew that business. They just took a platform technology and they aimed it at that particular use case. And that was very successful, but the applicability of the technology was much broader. That was apparent to us from the beginning, or even before we got there. If it was just help desk management, I'm sure we would not have, we would not have gone there.
Can I ask, you said something before, and I think to it every day, literally, and you said, narrow the focus, increase the quality. Can you talk to me, what did you mean by this, and how do you think about applying it to execution today?
Sorry, say that again, Harry. I blinked.
That narrow the focus, increase the quality. What does that mean to you, and how do you think about applying it today?
Well, the issue of focus is that we have a tendency as human beings to operate a mile wide and an inch deep, and it gets worse and worse over time. We pile more and more things on, and we ask people what their priority is. You get like 10. You might as well have none, right? We have no ability, to really think through what matters, what really matters, and what matters not at all. I often, for an exercise, ask people, if you couldn't do anything for the rest of the year, what would you do and why? I'm not asking them to drop everything. I say, if you had to pick one, what would it be and why? Now, this is a really hard question, because now you got to give up everything except one thing. And people have a monstrous time answering that question, but it's a super important question, because that's really the high leverage. If you get that wrong, then it's the intellectual laziness that we said, well, I have 5 priorities. The good ones are probably in there somewhere, I hope, as opposed to, let's think really, really hard about this. Because that's really what we have to do. Because if you're not, connecting to the correct set of things, I mean, what do you think is going to happen? Magic? No. I mean, you're just going to be frittering away resources, kind of hanging around the issues. But that's not, how you move the dial. That's not how you advance companies. You have to be very, very thoughtful and systemic about how you focus, how you deploy resources, how you spend your time. And most people are incredibly lazy that way. And not much happens. And the reason that not much happens is because there is literally no focus. There's no directed effort to what really matters. So a lot has to happen. We have a tendency to very quickly rush to conclusions about what we're supposed to be doing, and it really requires a lot of considered thought about what are we doing, what are we not doing. I've often made this analogy about in medicine. Medicine is a very diagnostics, analysis-oriented profession, right? We spend almost all our time on trying to figure out what's wrong with you, and then once we do that and we've eliminated all the possibilities, it's actually real easy to prescribe a therapy, right? The problem is it's really hard to do the diagnosis. Now in business, it's literally inverted. I mean, in business, we spend like 2 seconds, on figuring out what the problem is. And then we spend all our time on figuring out what we're going to do about it, right? And the reason often is, a lot of the MBA types, I mean, they're sort of schooled, to kind of have these knee-jerk, very quick, I know what's going on here. I've seen this before. I read about it. I've seen it before. And then boom, 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 and that level of certainty is completely misguided and misplaced, right? I often take conversations back from what are we going to do about it to how do we understand this problem to begin with, right? And it totally changes our understanding of it, what we might do about it, and so on. So I'm really big on leading with analysis and not leading with solution. But let's understand the problem. Let's not yet rush to what we're going to do about it. That'll become obvious, by the way. I mean, the better you get at analyzing, problems, the odds that you are going to effectively address it obviously go way up, because if your analysis is wrong, whatever you're planning to do about it is not going to be effective either, right? That's obvious.
Can I ask, is a good decision made today better than the perfect decision made tomorrow?
No, actually, I think people have sort of an unnatural rush to judgment. But because if you're wrong, I mean, you're losing even more time and more resources and more confusion and opportunity costs and so on. So it really behooves you, to be thoughtful about understanding what you're dealing with. That's the time to really not rush. Okay, there are many times to have an extreme urgency, but knee jerking and jumping to conclusions is not what I would recommend you do.
How do you evaluate your own decision making today? In the book you talk about speed of execution being so important. How do you think about and evaluate your own decision making style and process today?
Yeah, well, it's not so much the speed of decision making; it's just a general urgency. It's really the tempo and the pace at which things happen, which I think is way too slow. There's just all this slack that exists in the system that it's just an attitude adjustment that will speed things up. That's all it takes. We're just naturally slow. Hell, we're glacial, if you let us, right? It's really important that people step up the damn pace. They're like, can I get back to you next week? Well, how about tomorrow? What's wrong with tomorrow? And then they have to think about it, why it has to be next week versus tomorrow. In other words, they just want to buy themselves some time. Well, no. I mean, I really want to go faster. Let's iterate, quickly. Even if, we meet tomorrow and we still have a lot of remaining questions, fine. We'll meet again the next day, right? But just let's create that tempo and that pace and that urgency in everything we do. It doesn't mean that we rush to judgment or make stupid decisions. It just means that we build urgency and pace into the way we go about stuff,
So I love that urgency and pace. My question to you is, when you have a company now the size and scale of Snowflake, how do you instill that same urgency and principle of urgency across such a distributed but also large workforce?
Well, you do it in every single interaction, every single message, every single meeting, basically every waking moment. You have to have that filter on. Can this be faster? Can this be quicker? I've always used this example of walking into a California DMV, which is arguably the worst service experience on the planet. There's no urgency there. That's sort of the human condition played out to the absolute worst. You can spend 2 hours for standing in 3 different lines with hundreds of people just to get your driver's license renewed. How does it get that bad? Okay, because nobody cares, right? So it all starts with somebody has to care, about the quality and the pace and the way these things happen. And there's so much room up, and that's the whole point of the book. It's called Amp It Up. Why? Because there's all this room, in the margin, to do things faster, to do things better, to do things more effectively, and it's just free money is what I call it,
And speaking of that pace and amping it up, one of the ways that one can amp it up, and you say this in the book, is the element of when there's doubt, there's no doubt. Can you talk to me about how you think about this? And I always struggle on this one, honestly, Frank, because I'm like, sometimes people just need time, and you doubt them, but they just need time, and then sometimes they're just shit. Sorry. How do you think about when there's doubt, there's no doubt?
Doubt tells you everything you need to know. Okay, because when that's what the saying is. When there's doubt, it's a tiebreaker. When there's doubt, you have your answer. There should not be any doubt. That's the whole point, right? I mean, when you make decisions, there should not be any doubt. So when there is doubt, you shouldn't be doing it, right? When you're trying, I mean, I've often have this in hiring decisions. People have doubts. Well, you have your answer. Don't hire a person that you have doubts about. Don't. Okay. And it's a tiebreaker, because people get confused in their minds and they go around and around and they just can't get there. Okay, fine. Let's not do it then. In other words, it's a tiebreaker. It's a way of thinking about breaking the tie. And it's also a safe way, because when there's doubt, there's reasons why there's doubts. We may want to go and examine those reasons and talk about it ad infinitum, or you just say, well, the hell with this. There's doubt, so we're not doing it. It's understood. We need to have high conviction. We by the way, driving towards high conviction is very important. When you do something, you need to have this overwhelming sense that this is the right thing, to do, and we want to do it, and we're excited about it, right? Then the odds that you're having a good decision go way up. When there's doubt, you're probably already screwed. You push something through that you're doubtful about. Odds are, not going to work out. So that's where that saying comes from. When there's doubt, there's no doubt.
When you let someone go, this is, I think, so many startup founders struggle because it takes way too long for them to let the person go. That said, if it's a sales rep in enterprise sales, you could doubt me, but I could just be working on super long sales cycles, Frank, and you need to give me a bit of time here, my friend. How do you balance between every relationship's got a bit of doubt? Kind of give them a bit of time.
Yeah, but that's, look, it's not so superficial that we just look at the top line results and that tells everything, because we're going to go inspect your activity levels, and, in other words, we're going to find out everything. And it may well be that we're like, no, we will get conviction based on the level of effort and the progress we're making and the things we're doing. That's just fine. It's not just like, okay, you're not getting to the desired outcome and therefore it's end of story. That's not how it is. But, when you start peeling back the layers and there's nothing there, then you also get to your answer, okay? Because now that's the explanation for the lack of results,
When you peel back the layers, talk to me about calibration sessions. You write about this in Amp It Up, and I love this part. How do you think about calibration sessions? What are they? How do you structure them? Who comes? Tell me more.
Well, I mean, we don't do MBOs. For example, I've killed off MBOs in every company I've ever been in if they had them. That's an easy call. I don't want people running their own show. I mean, if I got to pull them off a project, they start negotiating with me for relief. I mean, it's the biggest bunch of bull I've ever seen. People are not running their own show, okay? We're all part of the same show here. So, but we also don't do performance reviews. So that's another thing we don't do. The written performance reviews end up being used against you. It's like a legal trap. So what we do instead is, we have a quarterly, performance compensation model, if you will. And what it means is that everybody who is not in sales, because salespeople are on commissions plans, of course, but everybody who is not in sales gets a conversation, a money conversation, and a performance conversation every single quarter. And the way we do it is, the company first needs to earn the bonus money. So we have the company goals. They get communicated. Everybody knows what they are. And based on our performance there, we fund the bonus pool for the entire company. Then we take that money and we start allocating it to the management ranks. Each manager gets their amount of money, and then they now have to go and attribute that money to their staff. That's the calibration process. And what we're asking for is a bell curve distribution. In other words, you're not going to peanut butter that money out like everybody gets the same amount. That's typically what people do because they don't want the confrontation with who's good, who's bad, and there's somewhere in between. But the real reason that we're doing this is not so much that I want to take money away from non-performers or marginal performers. It's really that I want to overcompensate, the top people in the company. I don't want them to feel like shit. I'm getting the same, bonus as the next guy who is like, can't even hold a candle to what I bring to it, right? So that I want to have high differentiation between top people and average and the rest of the gang. So the bell curve is really important. So we ask these managers, whatever your bell curve is, we want to see it. We want to see the distribution of how you are allocating that money that we made available to you. And they do it. It's a bit of a learning experience in the beginning, because it's like, God, how is an engineering manager going to, chat with their entire team one-on-one about, well, why are you getting this? Well, I'm not getting that. Well, how do I get more next quarter? Well, those are exactly the types of conversation we want them to have, with people, right? So they become much more critical evaluators of people's performance during the quarter, because they know, the calibration process comes around every single quarter, and conversations are there to be had, and they need to be credible and legitimate, and they need to be accepted, right? So it's the great thing is, if we do have to separate, with somebody, the first thing we do is we go look at, what's the bonus history for this person? Because if we're going to separate, we would expect to see substandard bonuses there over the preceding periods, right? If that's not the case, then now you have a real problem, because somebody is basically, being compensated really well, and you would expect that to be for a really strong performance, and now you want to separate. So that would reflect very, very poorly on the manager, if that were the case. But almost all the time, is you will see substandard bonus and performance if when it comes time to separate. The nice thing is, it becomes a very fast and cost-efficient process to go through the separation as well, because we don't get lawyers in and all this kind of misery, because there's a very clear record. Yeah, we have communicated to you every single quarter, and the money talks the talk. Okay, so it's not like you weren't informed every step of the way, one period after another, what was going on. So it all works, and it's particularly important, as I said, for your top people, because I really want them to feel singled out as top people and not being thrown into the pile with everybody else. In other words, you're not special. No, you are special, and we're gonna reinforce that with the money conversation that goes with that. And we do the same thing with equity, by the way, because we have it once a year, an equity refresh process as well, and we do the same thing. Managers get a certain amount of equity. Now, you make a recommendation how you want that equity allocated to your team, okay?
Frank, if we think about those as kind of two compensatory levers to single out the best, I spoke to Carl Aschenbach and Doug before the show, and they said that Frank is simply the best leader when it comes to getting the best performance out of team members in particular. What do you think you do, forgetting the money side, to get the best out of people in a way that, bluntly, very, very few other leaders can?
Well, we have a very empowering style. What that means is we really want to turn them loose. One of the biggest frustrations early on in my career, and I talk about that in the book, by the way, is that I was always on a short leash. I don't belong on the short leash. A person like me should not be on the short leash. But I was, because that's just the stage mentality and culture of the times, right? And it's not an accident that my career took off once I got my first CEO job, because now I have my hands free. I was off the leash, and I was running wild, okay? But, and by the way, that went on for a long period of time, okay? I didn't get my first CEO job until I was 43. So I lived a long time, on the short leash, and I find that incredibly debilitating for good people, right? So good people, I have this very strong reflex. When I have good people, I am going to turn them loose, and I'm going to give them everything that they are asking for. They will be held to account, but I'm going to give it all, right? So great people, they are going to do great in that kind of an environment. Empowerment is the most intoxicating thing you can possibly do to people, and that the good people, who really want to run hard, So I just eliminate all the the things that are going to hold them back.
How do you think about the tough balance between giving them the freedom to let them loose, but also making sure that they don't feel, shit, if I make a mistake, I'm going to get fired? So the freedom, but also not the fear of being fired if they go too big.
Yeah, and by the way, Scott McNeely used to say, fail fast. In other words, you can do really well by being a very fast course corrector, meaning that you acknowledge your mistakes and you fix them and then you move on. That's actually a very acceptable way of doing things. Hell, I make mistakes in hiring, and I make a show of it to let people know I fucked this up, and I'm fixing it, because I'm basically giving everybody else permission to do exactly that. The last thing I want you to do is defend your bad decisions, okay, because you're afraid of the consequences if you acknowledge the fact I screwed this up. No, it's actually good when you actually know quickly that no, this is wrong, and we have to correct. We have to course correct. Course correction, if you can do it fast, is man. I mean, that's the next best thing after making perfect decisions. Well, nobody makes perfect decisions, okay? So,
can I ask something that I spend a lot of time with founders on? Bunny, it's kind of a little bit Silicon Valley New Age culture, where it's like we need to create these environments of safety, and everyone's so loved and cherished. And I'm kind of like, all right, great, but let's also move with speed, and let's also be deliberate. I'm worried that we're getting into this kind of too fluffy culture where everything's too nice. Do you see that too? And how do you think about that kind of new age fluffy culture compared to the hard driving execution of getting shit done?
Yeah, I think that what you're describing, I'm absolutely recognizing it. It's definitely something over the last, I don't know how many years. It's just, it's not a culture that I subscribe to. I mean, being in business is like being in professional sports. We're here to win. And, great performance gets embraced and not so great performance gets rejected and repelled. We're not congratulators. We're not doing victory laps. It's just not our style. It's like, when we score a touchdown, we're not going to do a celebration in the end zone. We're just not, because we're supposed to score touchdowns. It's just the absurdity of celebrating things that you're supposed to do, and constantly reinforcing what a great job people are doing. I think that's just complete nonsense. There is a time, to recognize, but it's not all day long. You don't get recognized for finding the bathroom, in the building. Okay, it's just the triviality, and also has no meaning anymore because people get patted on the back at every turn because they're feeling so insecure. Well, we all feel insecure. That's a normal state. Embrace it.
Do you feel? I mean this respectfully. Do you feel insecure, Frank? No offense, you've done this 3 times. You're a bit of a seasoned war vet who's seen it all.
No, we feel insecure and high anxiety all the time. I mean, I often tell CEOs, if you're feeling anxious, congratulations, because you passed the intelligence test. You should be anxious. People are trying to kill you. You'd be insane if you weren't anxious. Okay, that's a normal state, right? That's where that saying comes from. Get comfortable being uncomfortable, because uncomfortable is your normal state.
Do you ever worry that discomfort or insecurity is driving decision making, which it can very easily do?
Yeah, and it should, because you should be. By the way, if you're overconfident about your decisions, you're probably an idiot. Because how do you know? You don't know. So you should be very nervous and anxious about what you're doing. Now, obviously, you're going to acquire, feedback over time, whether you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. But being overconfident is stupid. You should be highly skeptical about everything constantly. So that doesn't mean that you lack conviction. We're not going to sort of, revisit, what we're doing every single day, but we are watching, right? Are we getting the feedback that we're expecting? And if not, why not? And if we do good, we'll do more, but at the same time, we don't have this sort of mindless, oh, this is great, it's all going to work. No, you'll be insane. Ask any military leader. You think they approach the battlefield that way? They'd be crazy,
You said people are trying to kill you there. I always say when it comes to competition, row your own race, keep your head down. In the book, you mentioned competition and reference it to war. How do you approach competition today then, given the war reference?
Well, it's really a modern form of warfare business, right? And that's a good thing because, people have been at war because, that was the only sport that was available to them, historically. So now we're in business. And at least that's a war where, at least we don't have personal casualties. We do have, companies that become casualties all the time. But we basically take that dynamic and that aggression that exists in people, and we direct it towards, commercial pursuit, which I think is outstanding because it raises, it raises everybody up, prosperity in society, and it makes everything work. So we take those aggressive tendencies that exist in the human condition, and we focus them in a way that they actually, bring a lot of benefit to society as a whole. But it is true. We are pursuing business because there's going to be casualties, not personal casualties, But, some companies are not going to make it. Many of them are not going to make it. So,
have you changed as a leader over time?
sure. I mean, of course you changed. I mean, that's just everything changes, right? Nothing stays the same. The advantage of having done this stuff, a few times is that, you're not second guessing yourself as much. You are faster to pull triggers. You're more certain that what you're seeing is exactly what you're seeing. I was a much more reasonable person when I was a younger man, because I waited things out. I tried to help people, and then in the end, I was reasonable, but I was also wrong. That's what I learned. So now I'm unreasonable, but I'm right. So
I love that. Speaking of being kind of unreasonable and right, often decisions are made in board meetings, and at least conveyed in board meetings. How would you describe your style of board management, Frank? Because it's a difficult one. I always feel sorry for first-time founders. Like, how the fuck are you meant to know how to manage a board? When you think about your style of board management, how do you think about it?
yeah, I think that's a topic I often talk about with founders who are sort of new to that dynamic, but having been around boards for a long time. And by the way, I made all those mistakes myself. I was delusional as a younger man as well as to what the relationship with the board really is and what it is. And but the reality is a board needs to be led. Okay, I mean, I always tell people the worst thing you can possibly do is go into a board meeting and go, "What do you guys think?" You've just created a vacuum. Okay. And typically, on the board, you got people that are, I call them the old tycoons, people that used to have a big job, but now they're retired, but they still have the need to assert themselves. Well, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to step into that vacuum and try and dominate a conversation. Now you've lost control over the conversation. So you never go out there, what do you guys think? No, you're going to go out there and you're going to tell them what you think, and then obviously there can be debate and discussion and challenge. That's okay, but you have just filled that vacuum, okay? And now it's a matter of, discussing it, vetting it, tweaking it, whatever, right? But you lead the board. You don't create a vacuum that, they're not your boss because you're on the board yourself. They're not your friends. They could be your friends, but that's sort of inconsequential, or it really doesn't matter whether they're friends or not. Because then the board's relationship is a fiduciary. They're a check on you. They're making sure that there's alignment with investor interest, and obviously they're there to hire and fire you. So, but the reality is, CEOs don't get easily fired. Okay, that's obviously last resort. It's also a trigger that doesn't get pulled that much because it's very, very consequential to take a CEO out. So most CEOs are far more, timid than they should be based on what their role really is. And the reality is the CEO has enormous power, but most CEOs don't realize they have it, and they don't exercise the full measure of the power that they've been handed because they think that, they are interpreting that there are constraints around them that they should observe that really aren't there, and as a result, they're way more timid than they should be,
Frank, advise me. I'm on board today as a board member, sorry. What can I do to be the best board member to you, the CEO, as possible? And what advice would you give younger people assuming their early board roles?
Yeah, one of the things I do when I'm acting in an advisory capacity, and it could be on a board or something else, I try never to prescribe to people like do this or do that. Okay. Instead, I say, here's a way to think about it. So that's much more of a, you decide whether it makes sense. You try it on for size. And by the way, I'm not saying that this is the right way to think about it. I just said this is a way to think about it, right? And you use that as part of your process, of determining, how you want to deal with the situation. Now, sometimes there are situations where I draw a hard line. Some things that are so glaring, so insane that it's amazing that we're even having a conversation about it. But sometimes it's nuanced, and it's just like, look, here's how I would look at it, but you decide for yourself. It doesn't matter to me whether somebody agrees with me or not, because they need to make their own decisions. It's not my decision, it's theirs. So why would I care? I'm just giving them an input, and they can use it as they see fit. But you become a good board member that way. And the reason is people will seek you out for your point of view, because they know, you're not going to be pissed, if they decide to do something else, right? They will not come back to you if they think that you expect them to do exactly what you tell them, right? So the good relationships are the ones that are highly consultative, but at the same time, maintain my distance. I don't own the decision, they do. And I want them to own the decision, not me, right? So if they become strong owner, strong decision maker, then I am achieving my objective now, rather than I'm stepping into their shoes, which is absolutely the wrong reflex,
I totally agree, especially in terms of the positioning of your thoughts there. I do want to move into the quick fire round there, Frank. So I say a short statement, and then you give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
Why not?
Okay, so obviously I loved Amp It Up, my new favourite book. When you think about books that have had a particular impact on you, what books stand out?
Well, there are many, some from years ago, and then I read new books constantly as well. Actually, in terms of new books, I just read Ryan Holiday's Courage is Calling, which I highly recommend especially to young people, because it's all about how do you muster courage, and you need courage in every walk of life. But not many people have really thought about it, understood what that means, and a lot of people back away from mustering courage because that's just a natural reflex. Courage is rare, and I think you really need it, especially as a young person in business, especially if you're a CEO or entrepreneur. You need tons of it. So that's why I like that book. And Ryan Holiday's written many things, by the way, that I find quite inspiring, and I think it helps people calm themselves down and think rationally through situations. But a book I read many years ago that I still talk about is a book called The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. And basically, trust is the core currency of any human endeavor, and it's one of those most underrated, underappreciated ideas, concepts, and currencies. And learning about trust is incredibly important because, when you have trust with employees, everything gets better in organizations, just everything. And by the way, if you don't have it, everything gets worse, okay? And by the way, trust is either something you have or you don't have. There's nothing in between, okay? So you need to really pursue it. Otherwise, you won't have it, and then it has detrimental consequences. The same is true with customers. When customers feel that you have their back, they're just going to hand you their business with their eyes closed. They're not even thinking about it. They're just signing for it because I trust you. And when they don't, it becomes the most high friction, endeavor and most frustrating thing. So trust is something that you really have to pursue and understand, rather than, well, it'll just happen. Well, it might if you have the right instincts and reflexes, but for most of us, it's something that we really have to think about. You have to behave in certain ways, to engender trust. It doesn't just fall off a log. So that's why I love that book. And I've reread it. The concepts are very simple, but the implications of it they're everywhere, constantly.
What three traits would you most like your children to adopt, Frank?
Say again?
What three traits would you most like your children to adopt?
Well, courage would be number one. Because it's very hard to live without it, and not many people have it. Again, because they don't think about it, and they just sort of reflexively, behave, because we all do that as humans. The second thing is, and I like this in everybody, is a measure of malcontent. People that are not satisfied with the status quo just because they always have this need, and they always see the variance between what is and what could be. I mean, that's essentially the description of drive, okay? Drive comes from somewhere, and it comes from the gap that exists between the status quo and what could. In other words, it's a reason to get out of bed in the morning, I sometimes get asked the question, what kind of people are you trying to hire? Employees ask that question. What kind of people are we looking for? And I'm looking for maladjusted people that have a chip on their shoulder, people that have something to prove, versus people that, they are so well balanced, they have to think about a reason to get out of bed. So we like the people that have that high variance, between where they are and where they need to be. And that propulsion and drive is very, very powerful. I like to bet on that. I mean, most of the entrepreneurs that I know that are very, very successful, I mean, there is a deep-seated imbalance with these people. That's where it comes from, and so and it's also immensely satisfying. I think people like that become very valuable assets. They may also be difficult to be around. I'm not going to lie to you, but that's just the cost of doing business, right? So, but at the same time, the third thing is, you need to have people that have empathy. Empathy is really, really important. If you don't care about how other people, are feeling or how they're relating, I think it's people really need to sense, your empathy. It's very, very important. They need to sense that you're not sort of a cold-blooded, executor, and they don't sense the importance of what they're doing. I mean, one of the things I talked about in my all hands meeting, actually it was last week. People ask me why are you here, because they think that we work for a living, which we don't at this juncture. And I said, look, and I says, whatever I do here, I can't really move my own dial, but I can move yours, okay? And you're counting on me, to make the most of your investment in the company, because you hired on, you show up every day with the best of what you've got. So the deal is, I'm going to do the best I can for you. I want your family, you, to be in a different station of life as a function of you having been here, not just your career, but your entire circumstance. And the great thing is, because we've had these three great companies over the last 20 years, there's hundreds, thousands of people who have been profoundly moved by the experience. They're in different places today, massively different than they were before they joined our companies, and that's sort of the enduring reward that we get. It's the most treasured thing of these experiences, is the fact that you change people's lives, as a function, of what we did, and that's just the gift that keeps on giving. I sometimes get a text from somebody late on a Saturday night. They obviously have had a few glasses of wine, but they're emotional because all of a sudden they're coming to terms with where they are. They never thought they would be there, and they just want to express their gratitude and appreciation for the fact that they were part of this experience and how it has changed everything, for them. And people forget about that, because a lot of good gets done in Silicon Valley and other places, where we built these companies. And the incoming tide floats all boats, and that's literally true. I mean, everybody gets lifted, by these successful companies, and then they become really important people in their families, in their extended orbits. They become a backstop, economically, to tons and tons of people. So lots and lots of good is coming off this. And I think a lot of people think like, oh, you're just buying a lot of boats and houses and all that. But the reality is, it is much more, there's a much more thoughtful way of thinking about the effects that wealth creation has through these kind of companies.
Final question for you, Frank. How do you think about your own relationship to money? You've gone from bluntly, not having money to obviously being very successful. How do you feel about your own relationship? It's something that I struggle with.
Well, it has completely changed. Obviously, in the beginning, everybody has natural, economic insecurity. Some people more than others, obviously, because having been on, having dealt with compensation for people for a long time, I've seen every flavor of that. But once you sort of, get a few degrees of separation from economic hardship, that relationship changes to the point where, it's sort of a topic that is, I look at money as just a number to me. It's like math. It's like, how many commas? I mean, it's like it has no meaning because it has no consequence on a day-to-day basis. I mean, how many bottles of wine can you drink? That kind of thing. So that relationship just goes away. And I also don't view money as a scorekeeper. Like, oh, I got more than you do. I mean, that's so not interesting to me. Those types of conversations. The nice thing about, having done this, a few times is that, you become more enlightened and more balanced and more thoughtful, I would say, about those kinds of things. So,
Frank, listen, I love the book. I absolutely am thrilled with this. Thank you so much for joining me today, and it was so much fun having you on the show.
you bet. Terrific. Good to see you, Harry.